The Etowah Mounds are famous in southeastern archaeology for their size and recovered artifacts that signify its important status as a powerful chiefdom in the Mississippian period, which began 1,000 years ago and ended with the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores. This period is notable in the southeast for the large number of expertly constructed cities with monumental features reliant on corn agriculture and complex trade networks of ritual artifacts from far away that gave their leaders considerable power within their cities and beyond. Etowah consisted at its peak of 3 platform mounds used for elite burials and residences, and 3 smaller mounds with a large plaza in front of the largest mound, and the site surrounded by a palisade with 2 borrow pits used to build the mounds and bury debris. Dozens of structures for families and social gatherings may have surrounded the mounds within the palisade and largely remain today in the form of post holes and wall trenches. The survey is intended to cover one of the borrow pits and palisades, so we should expect to find artifacts such as ceramics, lithics, sand, ash, and bone that should tell us what Etowah's residents ate and did. We also hope to pinpoint when the borrow pit was used and the palisade built, based on previous knowledge about when social complexity and agriculture ramped up, which should be implied by the artifacts found. The first step of the survey is reconnaissance, or just walking through the area of potential effect and inspecting the environment to determine 2 things. Is subsurface testing possible or obviated in places where cultural resources are most likely to be found, and is ground surface visibility optimal or obscured? We can see that other than the placement of trees and some tall grass, this land is good for surveying on and below the surface. Next, we have to set up a transect of parallel horizontal and vertical lines to divide the survey area into a grid system to track where we find artifacts. Due to the land coverage in the Project Ape, we only need 2 vertical and 2 horizontal lines 10 meters apart for a total area coverage of 900 square meters. This is often done with string and hammering in flags to mark where the lines cross, but in this game we'll use torches. We will utilize shovel testing to uncover subsurface artifacts, and since every block is 1 cubic meter, that shall be our test size, which is pretty excessive for real shovel testing but should be sufficient for this project. Artifacts can either occur in isolated occurrences or within sites, defined by Georgia guidelines as 3 or more artifacts from the same broad cultural period from 2 or more shovel tests within a 30-meter radius. We're going to start at shovel test 1 in the north. That looks like a poster for a structure. That's unexpected. Moving east to ST2. We find sand, which was usually used to cover up debris to cover the smell and dispel scavengers, and sometimes also used for mound construction. ST3 is back to the west. And this one is negative. ST4 has bone, which will have the zooarchaeologists identify. ST5 is another post hole, and the fact it's close to the first one means it is likely from the same structure. ST6 is ash, which was also used like sand, but hopefully this isn't a cremation, as human remains are a very sensitive subject legally and culturally. ST7 is more ash. We have to walk 50 meters back to ST8. Negative. ST9 is also negative. ST10 is sand. ST11 is ash. ST12 is bone. ST13 is more bone. ST14 is negative. So that wraps up the shovel testing west of the visitor center, and if we look at an overhead map of our findings, we see several interesting patterns. The post holes are indeed likely related and should be investigated further in a data recovery survey or phase 2 to identify the feature and period of use. There appears to be a cluster of sand and ash, suggesting a large amount of debris underneath that could be either an accumulative midden, common in all residential sites, or it could be the remains of a mass feast, a hallmark of a period when social organization was still collective, but power was shifted to fewer people who expressed their power with feasts that brought large amounts of people from other towns together, competing to have the largest feasts. This also warrants further investigation, and the latter possibility should explain or clarify Etowah's shift from a simpler egalitarian settlement to a more complex hierarchical one. The bone, after analysis, should tell us what was being eaten and how much, and in fact the feasting hypothesis can be tested with stable isotopes which have different ratios based on their life origin and can determine with rough but fair accuracy if they were locally acquired or were transported from farther away, say as a gift for a special event. And the negative shovel tests may correspond to the boundary of the midden or feast, so future surveys should focus on the northern and eastern extents. Now we have to make tests around this road to be expanded, which is likely to have crossed over part of the palisade, which was built in the middle of Etowah's lifespan for defensive purposes and used similar wall trench methods as the residences of the time. There are 6 shovel tests and we'll start with ST-15 in the northwest. Sand again. Moving on to ST-16. This appears to be daub, which was used in the construction of walls. Could this be part of the palisade? ST-17 is more sand. Moving back to ST-18. Bone. ST-19 is bone. ST-20 is another post hole. The shovel tests around the road are a little more ambiguous in this case, but we can still make some possible interpretations. One is that the daub does represent part of the palisade, and the sound may be attempts to put out a fire that has been hypothesized to have occurred in the context of war, either by the enemy or as a last-ditch effort by the Etowahans. The post hole may represent the palisade as well. 2 is that this area contains a structure other than a palisade, and the presence of bone and sand would be consistent with a charnel house to store the dead, maybe animals, maybe people. A future phase could make some test pits around the daub and post hole to determine its function. After completing our Phase 1 survey, we've learned how they are done early in an undertaking to determine the presence and extent of cultural resources, identify them to a basic extent, and whether they have the potential to be significant enough to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Even only from shovel tests or remote sensing or ground surface surveying, we can determine a great deal about the site's extent, its materials, and what they were used for based on previous research of the surrounding region. If the recovered materials are potentially significant for research or listing eligibility, further testing with more intensive or advanced techniques continues, and adverse effects from the undertaking are considered and resolved, a process that involves stakeholders such as Indian tribes and the general public. If the cultural resources are able to be recovered or protected from the undertaking, it will be approved to continue. And that in summary is the Section 106 process that most American archaeologists work with every day. I hope this presentation makes you want to learn more about Etowah's history and archaeology.